What's up, yo? This is chapter 1, page 10. Splitting, the black and white world of the borderline. The world of a borderline, like that of a child, is split into heroes and villains. A child emotionally, the borderline cannot tolerate human inconsistencies and ambiguities. He cannot reconcile another's good and bad qualities into a constant, coherent understanding of that person. At any particular moment, one is either good or evil. There is no in-between, no gray area. Nuances and shadings are grasped with great difficulty, if at all. Lovers and mates, mothers and fathers, siblings, friends, and psychotherapists may be idolized one day, totally devalued, and dismissed the next. When the idealized person finally disappoints, as we all do sooner or later, the borderline must drastically restructure his one-dimensional conceptualization. Either the idol is banished into the dungeon, or the borderline banishes himself in order to preserve the all-good image of the other person. This type of behavior, called splitting, is the primary defense and mechanism employed by the borderline. Technically defined, splitting is the rigid separation of positive and negative thoughts and feelings about oneself and others, that is, the inability to synthesize these feelings. Normal persons are ambivalent and can experience two contradictory feeling states at one time. Borderlines characteristically shift back and forth, entirely unaware of one feeling state while in another. Splitting creates an escape hatch from anxiety. The borderline typically experiences a close friend or relation, call him Joe, as two separate people at different times. One day she can admire good Joe without reservation, perceiving him as completely good. His negative qualities do not exist. They have been purged and attributed to bad Joe. Other days she can guiltlessly and totally despise bad Joe and rage at his badness without self-reproach. For now his positive traits do not exist. He fully deserves the rage. Intended to shield the borderline from a barrage of contradictory feelings and images, and from the anxiety of trying to reconcile those images, the splitting mechanism often achieves quite the opposite effect. The phrase and the personality fabric become full-fledged rips. The sense of his own identity and the identities of others shifts even more dramatically and frequently. Intended to shield the borderline from stormy relationships. Though feeling continually victimized by others, the borderline ironically and desperately seeks out new relationships, for solitude, even temporary aloneness, is more intolerable than mistreatment. To escape the loneliness, the borderline will flee to singles bars, the arms of recent pickups, somewhere, anywhere, to meet someone who might save her from torment of her own thoughts. Much like Teresa Dunn and Judith Rosner's Looking for Mr. Goodbar. In the relentless search for a structured role in life, the borderline is typically attracted to and attracts to her others with complementary personality disorders. The domineering, narcissistic personality of Jennifer's husband, for example, cast her in a role with little effort. He was able to give her an identity, even if the identity involved submissiveness and mistreatment. Yet for a borderline, relationships often disintegrate quickly. Maintaining closeness with the borderline requires an understanding of the syndrome and the willingness to endure a long walk on a perilous tightrope. Too much closeness threatens the borderline with suffocation. Keeping one's distance or leaving a borderline alone, even for brief periods, recalls the sense of abandonment as felt as a child. In either case, the borderline reacts intensely. In a sense, the borderline carries only a sketchy map of interpersonal relationships. He finds it extremely difficult to gauge the optimal psychic distance from others, particularly significant others. To compensate, he caroms back and forth from clinging dependency to angry manipulation, from outpourings of gratitude to irrational hate. He fears abandonment, so he clings. He fears engulfment, so he pushes away. He craves intimacy and is terrified of it at the same time. He winds up repelling those with whom he most wants to connect. Job problems. Though borderlines have extreme difficulties managing their personal lives, many are able to function productively in a work situation, particularly if the job is well structured, clearly defined, and supportive. Many perform well for long periods, but then suddenly, because of a change in the job structure or a drastic shift in the personal life, or just plain boredom and craving for a change, they abruptly leave or sabotage their position and go on to the next opportunity. The work world can provide sanctuary from the setting of social relationships. For this reason, borderlines frequently function best in highly structured work environments. The helping professions, medicine, nursing, clergy, counseling, also attract many borderlines who strive to achieve the power or control that elude them in social relationships. In these roles, borderlines provide the care for others that they yearn for in their own lives. Borderlines are often very intelligent and display striking artistic abilities. Fueled by easy access to powerful emotions, they can be creative and successful. But a highly competitive or unstructured job or a highly critical supervisor can trigger the intense, uncontrolled anger and hypersensitivity to rejection to which the borderline is susceptible. The rage can permeate the workplace and literally destroy a career. A woman's illness. Recent estimates indicate that women borderlines outnumber men by 2 to 1 among outpatients and perhaps by as much as 4 to 1 among hospitalized patients. Why do women seem so much more vulnerable to BPD than men? Some researchers propose that the same constitutional hereditary factors that predispose women to affective mood disorders are responsible for their vulnerability to BPD. Since some doctors feel BPD is closely associated with affective disorders, and affective disorders are more common in women, then BPD would be more frequently observed in females. Another theory is that the separation and individualization phase between mother and infant is more difficult for girls, resulting in more identity problems later in life. Many theoreticians point to the influence of social factors on women, particularly women's shifting role patterns over the past 25 years. See Chapter 4. Though the statistics are quite straightforward, some critics dispute their reliability, pointing out that women are more likely to enter therapy than men, so are more likely to be diagnosed as borderline. Other critics feel that a kind of clinician bias operates with borderline diagnoses. Psychotherapists perceive problems with identity as more normal in men. As a result, they may underdiagnose BPD among men. Still, other research believe that just as many men fulfill borderline criteria as women, but whereas women tend to become depressed, attempt suicide, or seek psychiatric care, men tend to act out violently against the world. It's definitely true. The effect of not being able to regulate emotion in females leads to internalized self-directed violence. The same problem in males results in aggressive and antisocial behavior. Eventually, the males are diagnosed as sociopathic and are channeled through the criminal justice system, where they may elude correct diagnosis forever. BPD in different age groups. Many of the features of the borderline syndrome, impulsivity, tumultuous relationships, identity confusion, mood instability, are major developmental problems for the adolescent. Indeed, establishing a core identity is the primary quest for both the teenager and the borderline. It follows, then, that BPD is diagnosed more commonly among adolescents and young adults than any age groups. Early investigations of BPD among the elderly lead to the impression that the syndrome was rare in the age group. Some researchers hypothesized that older borderline adults were able to achieve stabilization over time, or at least that they reached a point where they were no longer distressed enough to seek any further medical care. More recently, however, BPD has been increasingly recognized among the elderly, challenging the presumption that borderlines mature out over time. On the other hand, the observation may also be a function of the increased interest in older populations who have often been neglected in research studies in the past. Older adults must contend with a progressive decline in physical and mental functioning, which can be a perilous adaptive process for the aging borderline. For the fragile identity, the task of altering expectations and adjusting self-image can exacerbate symptoms. The aging borderline may deny deteriorating functions, project the blame of